My name is Susan. I've made choices I can never take back, choices that hurt the very people I loved most. Sometimes I wonder if life would have been different if I had stayed, but back then, I wanted more. And the truth is, love and family weren't enough to calm the storm inside me. I was just 22 when I married Arthur. He was steady, reliable, grounded. A good man. The kind of man women are supposed to want. He had a decent job at the plant, strong hands, and quiet eyes that promised safety. For a while, I thought safety was what I wanted. I thought that building a home, cooking dinners, folding laundry, tucking kids into bed would fill me with purpose. And for a short while, it did. When Clara was born, I felt something indescribable. Holding her tiny fingers in mine, watching Arthur beam with pride, it was pure. Then came Mary, and suddenly, we had a family. But it didn't take long before the cracks started to show. Arthur's life revolved around work. Overtime, double shifts, side jobs. I know he did it for us. He never let us go without food, never missed a bill. But his presence in the house became less and less. He'd come home exhausted, hands stained with grease, clothes reeking of sweat and machinery. He'd sit at the table, half listening to me talk, eyes already closing. I began to feel invisible. People like Arthur are proud of being simple. A roof over your head, food on the table. To him, that was enough. But to me, it felt suffocating. I'd watch women in town with manicured nails, new dresses, plans for the weekend. I'd see them laughing with friends, going places. Meanwhile, I was trapped in the same four walls, cleaning dishes and managing crying toddlers while Arthur chased overtime. Resentment grew inside me like a weed. I tried to bury it. I tried to remind myself that this was family life, that plenty of women would kill for a husband who worked as hard as Arthur. But every time he walked out the door, leaving me alone with two little girls, I felt abandoned. Not physically, emotionally. And then there was my temper. Arthur used to say I had a fire in me, that I was passionate. At first he loved it. But when that fire turned into shouting, into doors slammed and tears, it drove a wedge between us. I hated myself after every outburst, but I couldn't stop. The turning point came quietly. A friend invited me on a weekend trip to the city. I told myself it would be just a break, a chance to breathe. But the moment I stepped into that lively chaos of lights, music, expensive drinks, I felt alive again. Like the version of Susan who had dreams before she became just mom and wife. When I came home, I looked around our little house and felt only emptiness. It wasn't that I didn't love Clara and Mary. God, I did. But motherhood felt like a cage some days. And Arthur? He was part of the cage, with his steady routines and simple dreams. I wish I could say I left after long conversations, after trying everything. But the truth? One day, I just broke. I told Arthur I couldn't do it anymore. I told him I needed more than what he could give me. His face that day, it still haunts me. He didn't yell, didn't fight. He just looked at me, like he couldn't understand how the woman he built a life with was suddenly a stranger. I left. Clara was 10. Mary was 7. They were too young to understand, but old enough to feel the wound. I promised them I'd visit, promised them I'd always be there. I meant it in the moment. But life has a way of pulling you in different directions. Some months I'd show up with smiles and gifts, trying to make up for lost time. Other times, I vanished, caught up in my own battles, my own selfishness. There's one memory that still stings. Clara was 14 in a school play. I told her I'd be there, front row, cheering louder than anyone. She believed me. I saw the hope in her eyes. But that same week, a friend called, offering me a last-minute trip. I chose the trip. Arthur was the one who sat through that play. Clara scanned the crowd and didn't find me. I imagine her smile faltered. I imagine Mary cried. I told myself they'd forgive me. Children always forgive, don't they? Arthur, for all his flaws, was there. Always there. He worked himself ragged, stretched every dollar, kept them clothed and fed. While I was chasing the life I thought I deserved, he was building the life they needed. I justified it by telling myself he was stronger, more stable, better at parenting. That maybe the girls were better off spending more time with him. That I was giving them freedom from my chaos. But in truth, I was just running from responsibility, from guilt, from myself. The years blurred. Then came Albert. Albert was everything Arthur wasn't. Sharp suits, expensive cologne, connections everywhere. He knew people, talked about investments, flew across cities for business. He made me feel glamorous again, like I was worth more than dish soap and overdue bills. With him, I wasn't just Susan, the ex-wife who left her kids. I was a woman again. Desired. Valued. Albert took an interest in Clara and Mary. He saw them as part of me, part of the picture-perfect family he wanted to build. He opened doors for them, internships, contacts, agencies. He gave them glimpses of the kind of life I always believed I should have had. And for the first time in years, my girls looked at me without resentment. They looked at Albert with admiration. Arthur's world, the old truck, the patched jeans, the modest little house, started to look small to them. I could see it. I could feel it. They were slipping slowly from his orbit to mine. I told myself this was my second chance. But then came the whispers of the past. The confessions I should never have made. The story I told Clara, then Mary, about the affair years ago. About the possibility that Arthur might not be their real father. It wasn't entirely a lie. There had been another man, briefly, before Arthur and I split. I never confirmed anything, but once the words left my mouth, they couldn't be taken back. Albert encouraged it. He spoke of adult adoption, of securing their future, of modern family structures. He made it sound so practical, so logical. And the girls, my sweet girls, started using his words, repeating his ideas. I should have stopped it, but part of me liked it. Part of me liked that for once, they were choosing me. I didn't realize then that this path, this story we were weaving, would destroy whatever fragile bridge still connected them to Arthur. And when I saw the look in his eyes during that first confrontation, when he pulled out those old paternity tests, when he tried to show them the truth, I realized too late that I had started a war I couldn't control. When Albert entered my life, it was like stepping into a new world. Arthur's world had always been steady, predictable, the same truck parked outside the same modest house, the same factory smell clinging to his clothes. With Albert, it was champagne, tailored suits, and whispers of business deals over candlelit dinners. He wasn't just a man, he was an experience. And for someone like me, who had spent years feeling small, ordinary, and forgotten, Albert was intoxicating. He reminded me that I wasn't just a mother who had failed her children, or a wife who had abandoned her husband. With him, I was desirable. I was important. Albert insisted on involving Clara and Mary from the start. "This isn't just about you, Susan," he'd say, flashing that confident smile. "It's about building a future for your daughters, too. They deserve to see what real success looks like." And I believed him. The first time he met them, he arrived in a gleaming car that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Clara's eyes lit up immediately. Mary tried to act unimpressed, but I saw the way she traced her fingers along the leather seats when she thought no one was looking. Albert didn't just bring gifts, he brought possibilities. For Clara, he arranged an internship at a company where he had contacts. He spoke to her about marketing, strategy, about a world that sounded exciting compared to the simple routines Arthur had taught her. For Mary, he introduced her to a local creative agency. "She's got an eye for detail," he told them confidently, as if he'd known her for years. Arthur could give them stability. Albert gave them dreams. And as their mother, I reveled in watching them drift closer to me again. For years, I had been the unreliable parent, the one who showed up late, sometimes drunk, sometimes not at all. The one who made promises and broke them. But with Albert, I finally had something to offer. I could see the shift in their eyes. Clara used to call Arthur for advice on everything. Suddenly, she was calling me to ask about outfits for networking events Albert had invited her to. Mary used to spend weekends camping with her father. Now, she canceled those plans to attend industry mixers Albert arranged. It was as though the gravity of their world was changing. And I encouraged it. Maybe it was selfish. Maybe it was vindictive. But part of me wanted Arthur to feel what I had felt for years, invisible. I wanted him to see what it was like when the people you love most no longer look at you as their center. Albert's presence gave me that power. Still, Arthur didn't give up easily. He kept trying. Camping trips, family dinners, small gestures to pull the girls back. But compared to Albert's glittering promises, Arthur's efforts seemed dull, outdated. One weekend, he planned a whole trip. Clara and Mary had agreed, or at least that's what they told him. But Albert invited them to an exclusive event, and just like that, their father was abandoned. When they told me, guilt pricked at the edges of my heart. I remembered the way Clara used to run into Arthur's arms when he came home, the way Mary used to beg him to push her higher on the swings. They had adored him once. But I pushed the guilt aside. This is life, I told myself. They're growing up. They need to think about their futures. And Albert made sure to reinforce that narrative. You have to understand, Susan, he'd say, swirling his drink casually. Arthur did his part. He gave them a childhood. But adulthood? That's about connections, opportunities, financial security.
I can give them that. We can give them that. We.
The words sank into me. For the first time, I felt like I was part of something bigger. A family that was moving forward, not stuck in the past. But then, I complicated things. It started with Clara. We were sitting together, sipping coffee in Albert's polished kitchen. She asked me about my life before the divorce. About whether I'd ever been tempted, ever made mistakes. And before I knew it, I was telling her. About the man I'd been involved with before Arthur and I officially split. About how timelines blurred, about how maybe, just maybe, Arthur wasn't her real father. Her face went pale. Are you saying we might not even be his kids? She whispered. I backtracked, tried to soften it. No, I'm just saying life is complicated. People make choices. Nothing's black and white. But yes, there's a possibility. I should have stopped there. But once you open a door like that, it's impossible to close. Clara told Mary. Mary came to me a week later, her voice shaky. Mom, is it true? About Dad not being our biological father? I looked into her wide eyes, and instead of denying it, I gave her the same half-truth. I told myself they deserved to know. That they were old enough now. That I was being honest. But in reality, I was planting seeds. Albert watered those seeds. He framed it as practical. If Arthur isn't their father biologically, then why pretend? I can adopt them. As adults, it's simple. Legally, financially, it makes sense. It's about securing their future. He said the words with such confidence, such certainty, that even I started to believe him. Clara and Mary latched onto the idea quickly. They began repeating Albert's phrases: modern family structure, emotional closure, financial security. They weren't just my daughters anymore. They were Albert's disciples. And part of me loved it. For the first time, they were on my side. They weren't defending Arthur. They weren't looking at me with disappointment. They were looking at Albert and me as their future. But the more they pulled toward us, the more tension built with Arthur. I remember the day Clara called me after speaking to him. Her voice was shaky, uncertain. Mom, Dad says he never doubted us. That we're his daughters, no matter what. He sounded so sure. I felt a pang then, a sharp stab of guilt. But before it could take root, Albert was there, smoothing it over. Of course Arthur would say that, he told her. He has nothing else. His whole identity is being their father. But facts matter. And if the facts are uncertain, then so is his role. Albert made it sound so rational, so undeniable. When the girls told Arthur about our talks, he didn't explode the way I expected. He pulled out old documents instead. Legal papers. Paternity tests from the divorce. Proof. He laid it all out for them. But Clara brushed it off. Mom says those old tests might not be accurate, she told him. Science is more advanced now. Mary added softly. Albert said he'd pay for new tests. But what's the point? It's about who steps up, right? And he's stepping up for us now. When they told me later, I should have felt horror at their words. I should have stopped them, corrected them. But instead, a secret thrill ran through me. They were choosing me. Choosing Albert. For the first time in years, I wasn't the outsider. I was the center. I didn't see then the destruction it would cause. I didn't see how Arthur's quiet pain would harden into something irreversible. All I saw was my daughters, my Clara and my Mary, sitting closer to me than they had in over a decade. And I told myself that whatever it took, I would hold on to that, even if it meant rewriting the truth. When Clara and Mary told me they were going to Arthur's house, my stomach twisted. They said it so casually. "We just want to clear the air, Mom." But I knew better. I knew my daughters. Their voices carried hesitation, fear. And in the back of my mind, a whisper warned me, Arthur isn't going to play along this time. For years, I'd painted him as the steady but dull man, the one who would always bend, always forgive, always keep his voice low while mine rose to a scream. But the moment Clara mentioned the words paternity and adoption to him, I sensed something inside him would snap. And deep down, I was terrified. Not terrified for myself. I'd lived with guilt and consequences before. But terrified that my daughters might suddenly see the truth. That they might realize I had been the architect of their doubts. Albert tried to calm me. "Don't worry," he said, slipping his Rolex onto his wrist like it was armor. "Arthur doesn't have the backbone to stand against this. He'll show them his little papers, maybe cry a little, but in the end, they'll choose us. They already have." He was so confident, so dismissive. And maybe that was part of why I clung to him. He had this way of making every fear sound irrational. But when Clara called me after the meeting, her voice shook in a way I hadn't heard in years. "Mom, he had documents. From the divorce. Paternity tests. He showed them to us." My chest tightened. "And what did you say?" "We told him they might not be accurate anymore," Clara whispered. "Science has advanced. You told us that." For a moment, relief washed over me. They were still repeating my words. They were still choosing me. But then she added, "He looked so broken, Mom. Like we'd stab him." Mary's soft voice piped in the background. "He didn't yell. He just folded the papers back up and put them away. He looked empty." Empty. The word sat heavy in my chest. I knew that look. I'd seen it years ago, the day I left him standing in the kitchen with two little girls clinging to his legs. That blank, hollow look when a man realizes love isn't enough to keep someone. I told myself Arthur would recover. He always did. But something inside me shifted uneasily. The following days, I watched the distance grow. Arthur cut off their allowances. He revoked his support. Clara's rent help vanished. Mary's car loan was suddenly her own burden. The small safety nets he had so carefully built for them were gone overnight. At first, the girls were angry. How could he do this? Clara cried, pacing the living room. "We're his daughters." Albert chimed in smoothly. "It's exactly what I expected. Petty revenge. He can't stand the idea that you're moving on to something better." I nodded along, though something in me flinched. Better? Was it really better? Or had I just dressed up my choices in prettier clothes and sold them to my children? Still, I kept quiet, because speaking up would mean admitting the truth. Arthur had been there. Always. While I had left. Months passed, and Albert's empire began to show cracks. Deals slipped. Connections dried up. I caught him staring at spreadsheets late at night, jaw clenched. He waved it off when I asked, but the dinners outgrew fewer, the champagne replaced with cheaper wine. The girls noticed too. Clara's internship ended with no job offer. Mary's agency lost its biggest client. Slowly, the glitter began to peel. And with it, their faith in Albert. I caught Clara staring at her phone once, a text unsent. "Just call him," I urged, though I wasn't sure who I meant, Arthur or Albert. When she finally spoke, her words gutted me. "Mom, what if we made a mistake?" I wanted to scream, "Of course you did." I wanted to cry and beg them to see that it wasn't their fault, that I had been the one whispering poison into their ears. But I couldn't. My pride, my stubborn, ugly pride, sealed my lips. The knock at Arthur's door came one Saturday morning. I wasn't there, but I heard about it later, in fragments from the girls. How they stood nervously on his porch, eyes red from sleepless nights. how they begged for 10 minutes to speak, and how Arthur, calm and cold, let them in but refused to sit. They recounted his words to me, halting, broken. "You chose them," he had said, voice even. "You chose their story over decades of your actual life with me." Clara's voice cracked as she told me. He looked at me and asked if wanting a fresh start meant erasing everything he'd ever done for us. Mary sobbed. He asked if his sacrifices weren't success enough for us. They cried as they repeated his words, but all I could picture was Arthur's face. The man I once called husband. The man I left behind. Standing in that same living room, looking at the daughters he had raised, and declaring they were no longer his. "You are not my daughters," he told them. The words echoed in me like a death sentence. Because I knew, in that moment, Arthur had severed the last thread holding us together.
Not just with them.
With me too. When the girls came back to me, they were shattered. Clara's mascara streaked down her face, Mary's shoulders trembling. "He told us to go back to you and Albert," Clara whispered. "He said we're not his anymore." I should have comforted them. I should have wrapped them in my arms and told them it wasn't true. But I didn't. Because deep inside, I knew it was. Arthur had finally done what I never thought he could. He had let go. And in doing so, he exposed me. For years, I had built my power on the assumption that no matter what, Arthur would be there. That his loyalty, his quiet devotion, would be the safety net under all of us. I had gambled with it, twisted it, exploited it.
But now?
That net was gone. And the look on my daughters' faces told me they realized it too. Albert tried to spin it. "He's bluffing," he told them. "He doesn't mean it. Fathers don't just walk away. He'll come back around." But I saw the doubt in Clara's eyes. The terror in Mary's. Because they knew Arthur was not bluffing. He had finally chosen himself. And we were left to face the wreckage. After Arthur closed the door on Clara and Mary, I thought surely he would soften. He had to, didn't he? For 20 years, he was the man who sacrificed everything for them. The father who stayed awake through double shifts just to help with a science project. The man who patched scraped knees and paid for college tuition without a second thought. He couldn't just erase all of that with a few cold words. At least, that's what I told myself. But days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. And Arthur's silence was absolute. No calls. No texts. Not even a polite holiday card. My daughters kept waiting. Every time their phones buzzed, I saw that flicker of hope in their eyes. Maybe it was him. But it never was. Arthur had really cut them off. And I had to watch as the truth sank in. Meanwhile, Albert's empire crumbled. The man who once strode through life with effortless confidence began to stumble. His business partners pulled out of deals. Clients stopped returning his calls. The glossy suits started to look more like costumes than power. At first, he hid it. He still carried himself with bravado, still poured drinks like nothing was wrong. But I noticed the small things. The stack of unpaid bills, the quiet arguments over money, the way he flinched whenever Clara or Mary asked about opportunities that never came. One night, after too much wine, he finally admitted it. "It's all gone, Susan," he muttered, slumping into his chair. "The deals, the connections, everything." I stared at him, stunned. "What do you mean gone?" "I mean we're broke," he snapped, bitterness dripping from his voice. "And your daughters? They're just extra mouths to feed." My heart clenched. The man who once promised me a sparkling future now looked at my girls as burdens. He wasn't stepping up anymore. He was stepping back. And suddenly, the weight of my choices pressed down harder than ever. Clara's internship had ended without a job offer. Mary's agency had cut her hours until there was nothing left. Their bright futures, the ones I had promised them, the ones Albert had painted in dazzling colors, evaporated like smoke. They began to unravel. Clara withdrew into herself, her once confident voice now shaky whenever she spoke about the future. Mary cried at night, muffling her sobs with her pillow, thinking I couldn't hear. And for the first time, they looked at me with something worse than anger. They looked at me with disappointment. "Mom," Clara whispered one evening, What do we do now? Arthur won't even answer us. Her words slice me open. Because what could I say? That I had poisoned their trust in him? That I had built this fragile fantasy world on lies and half-truths? That in my desperate need to be chosen, I had destroyed the one relationship that had always been real? The guilt became unbearable. Then came the day they showed up at Arthur's house again. I didn't go with them. I couldn't face him. But I waited by the window, pacing, imagining what might happen. They came back broken. Mary's face was pale, her eyes swollen from crying. Clara wouldn't even meet my gaze. He told us, Mary choked, that we're not his daughters anymore. Not in any way that matters. I froze. Clara finally looked at me, her voice hollow. He said we made our choice. That we're Albert's now. And yours. Not his. The finality in her voice made my chest ache. Arthur had closed the door not just physically, but emotionally. He had drawn a line, and on the other side of it stood me, Albert, and our daughters, cut off, abandoned, unwanted. And the worst part? He was right. We had made our choice. I had led them to it. After that, everything spiraled. Albert grew crueler, snapping at me, belittling the girls. The charm that once drew me to him rotted away, revealing the selfish man underneath. He wasn't their father. He never wanted to be. He only wanted the picture-perfect family when it made him look successful. Now that the illusion was gone, so was his patience. Clara and Mary stopped looking at him with admiration. They stopped looking at me, too. The light in their eyes dimmed, replaced with resentment and quiet despair. And me? I was left with nothing but silence. Arthur's silence. The silence of a man who had given everything, only to be told he wasn't enough. The silence of a father who finally chose himself after decades of sacrifice. A year passed. I heard whispers about Arthur, how he still worked at the plant, still lived in that modest little house with the creaky floorboards. People said he looked peaceful. Peaceful. It stung more than anger ever could. Because while my life unraveled, while Clara and Mary stumbled through the wreckage of broken promises, Arthur had found calm. He no longer carried the burden of us. And I couldn't blame him. Some nights, I lie awake replaying it all. The school play I missed. The promises I broke. The moment I told Clara that Arthur might not be her father, planting the seed that would grow into poison. I see Arthur's face the day I left, the way he looked at the girls with quiet despair. I see his face the day he folded up those paternity papers, too tired to fight. I see his face the day he told my daughters they were no longer his. And I realize, I created this. I thought I was chasing freedom. I thought I was giving my girls opportunity. But what I really gave them was abandonment, confusion, and loss. Albert may have failed us, but the real betrayal was mine. Because Arthur had always been enough. I just refused to see it. Now Clara and Mary barely speak to me. They go through the motions, polite words exchanged over dinner, but the warmth is gone. They trusted me to guide them, and I led them off a cliff. Arthur's silence hangs over us like a ghost. Every time I hear Mary sniffle at night, I know she's thinking of him. Every time Clara stares at her phone, I know she's waiting for a call that will never come. And me? I'm haunted by the man I threw away. The man who gave everything, only to be cast aside for a shiny illusion. Arthur has peace. My daughters have regret.
And I
have nothing but the truth I can't escape. That I was the reason our family was destroyed. And there's no undoing it. No redemption. Just the quiet echo of a door closing forever.